with Mr. Falk. You have 6 minutes. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to both of our witnesses for your testimony here at committee. It's, I found that very interesting and very useful. With the TMX here, we'll do a little bit of background, just a little historical numbers here. The government purchased the TMX project for $4.5 billion from Kinder Morgan after Kinder Morgan had made many attempts to get the project moving, but was stymied by unrealistic assessment requirements and just wasn't able to get the ball over the finish line to make it happen. So the government picked it up. What should have been a $9.7 billion project quickly jumped to 12.8, and by 2022 it was reported that the pipeline was now 21.4 billion. That was in December of 2022. In March of 2023, this committee heard that the project was now at $31 billion. In 3 months, the project had increased by $8.8 billion. In April of this year, it was reported that the project was now at $34 billion, and in May it would begin to start shipping oil and transporting oil down the pipeline. So 34 billion in April. It's October today. In order for something to be used, it has to reach substantial completion, but that doesn't mean it's totally complete. Do either of you have any idea what the total cost of that project will come in at when it's totally complete?
Maybe I'll start with the question. It's probably a better line for, or a better question for the people at Trans Mountain Pipelines themselves. My understanding is the last public figure was about $34 billion.
What was reported back in April, although that will have been just to the point of substantial completion where the pipeline could allow oil to start flowing. And so I imagine that there could potentially be a different number by the time the dust settles. So can you talk a little bit about some of the things that contributed to the time that it took to get this pipeline built, the 12 years that you talked about? Was it government policy? Was it the requirements that were put on it by government, or what was the problem with the lengthy delay in getting this project to completion?
You know, one of the things I'd say is that we don't necessarily have all the insight into the comings of going of the TMX expansion in terms of the things that they were going through to get this pipeline built. I think your observation, though, is correct in that this should not have taken 12 years to get built. The original timeline was much shorter. I think it is something that speaks to the regulatory process and our ability to get these major projects done in Canada.
It's important that Canadians find out what the delays were that caused the lengthy delay.
Yeah, and I think that's the work of the energy regulator. I think that is their job. Their job is to look at the spend and to look at the construction period and determine whether or not that was reasonable or not. So it's a better question, I think, for the regulator and TMX people themselves versus Greg and I. We are on the outside looking in. We're certainly a shipper, but we're not necessarily privy to the spend or the timeline itself.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Spurl, you're in charge of tolls and tariffs. Can you tell me, prior to the TMX expansion coming into use, what was the toll rate to get oil from Alberta to coast?
I'm going to give you an approximate in terms of off the top of my head, but I think it was in the mid $2 to $3 range, depending on whether it was heavy or light. But I think that's a fairly representative number.
Okay, and Canadian Energy Regulator is the entity that establishes what the toll rate will be. What are their considerations in determining what the tolls should be?
Yeah, well, they have a number of tests that are really standard across the board for pipeline tolls. And it starts with, first of all, costs have to be prudent. And so the assessment of the costs that are before them, they will do an assessment, and the costs can't go into the tolls if they're not found to be prudent. And then, secondly, tolls have to be just and reasonable. And there's a lot of dimensions to that, but the just is really fairness. And they look at the what the underlying agreements were between the parties that agreed to the commercial arrangements. And reasonable encompasses a lot of things, such as competitiveness in the marketplace.
What do you anticipate the tolls will be once the energy regulator makes a determination in 2025?
I don't have any particular insight into what they're going to be beyond what's being filed. The CER will make that determination. I think the current tolls, some have suggested, are represented. The shippers would love them to be less, but they are equal for other tidewater access from Canada.
Thank you. 6 minutes with Mr. Patzer. Go ahead.
Well, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you so much to both witnesses for coming here today. I really do appreciate it. One of the most distinct honors that I have had in my time as a member of Parliament was joining with Chief Francis from Nicanee First Nation for a sweat and smudge ceremony when Natural Law Energy was going through the Keystone XL process. So I'm just wondering if you could talk just a little bit more about what that project would have meant for your nation, and if you want to just talk a little bit more about some of the great work that your nation is also doing on energy and what that's meant for your community.
Well, some of the things that come forward during that time, and yes, Chief Elvin Francis was at the table with all the other chiefs from Treaty 4, 6, and 7, and we did something really historical there. We brought nations together, to purchase the Keystone pipeline within Canadian boundaries. And I do believe if Biden didn't pull it, you'd have more access to housing, essential needs. Everybody's smart here, and most importantly, we bring a thumbprint of understanding our Mother Earth. And our people in Alberta, like anybody, our nations in Alberta, our treaty nations in Alberta, I should say, have lived amongst oil and gas. My fourth great grandfather, who was chief and signed Treaty Number 7, signed some oil deals with the Northwest Mineral Company. So that's how far back oil and gas goes in our nations. We're talking early 1900s, late 1800s. And we know that in our territory. It is common knowledge, so we understand that we must bring a balance with the essential needs, but also, our wisdom at the table, because we have that connection to creation. Thank you.
Trying to get multiple treaties together to a form under natural law, that's quite an accomplishment. And I'm just wondering if you could talk about how many communities are involved in this and just what the proposed project here would mean for those communities.
Well, I sit here today, I'm by myself. I'm honored to answer the call, the invite. But behind me, there's a lot of wisdom from elders, to technicians, to engineers. And I think a lot of what we work on is blazing trails for Indigenous. We just don't want to be marginalized anymore when it comes to industry. A lot of the stuff that happens in our territories, our traditional territories, have us sitting on the sidelines, have us sitting us looking in. So to be here and speak, with my feather hat as a hereditary chief, I crown chiefs. I've given a feather hat to your Prime Minister, Trudeau, but also was part of the crowning ceremony for the AFN National Chief, Cindy Woodhouse, at the beginning of this year. I was part and parcel to all of that. So, to speak, for all treaty areas, they have different needs, and there's different environments but the engagement process that we do have is always traditional. We go in there and we ask the elders first for their permission. Anything to do with buying pipelines or being part of it, we go to the ceremonies and we go to the elders and we ask them if it's right, if it's okay. Thank you.
Your opening remarks, you talked about the future and what that might look like for your nation. I'm just wondering, for the next generation, for the young people, I'm just wondering for opportunities that do exist, or maybe what opportunities could exist if Natural Law Energy, or if it's successful in its bid to buying this pipeline, those opportunities going forward. I'm just wondering if you could speak to the importance of that and also what it would mean for the elders as well.
So just to be clear here at the table, one of the things is it's Natural Law X, and the X symbolizes our forefathers. When they signed treaty, they didn't know how to speak English or write English, so they marked the treaty with an X. But that refers to Natural Law TMX. So just like you practice safer ways to do, corporate governance in Canada, we as well too. So we take the good as much as anybody else, and we try our best. So we incorporated another company called Natural Law X, which holds that distinction from Natural Law Energy, which was after the KXL, and Natural Law X, which is Natural Law TMX. Whole different set of members. One's from Edmonton all the way to the southern peninsula of Vancouver Island, and we have about 40 nations that we're talking to. And the only way you get things done is through a band council resolution. You shouldn't be running around saying that you have nations on your side with a chief one-person signature. You got to have a band council resolution to come to the table, and you practice it through a GP and an LP with your practices in corporate Canada.
Thank you. We'll now go to Mr.
Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. And I do want to ask Chief McGuinness some questions. But before I do that, I want to agree with Mr. George on several things. And I want to thank you for your testimony. I do agree with you that the government should have never bought the TMX project. It should have left it alone. And I'm as frustrated as you are that there's been $20 billion spent on that project, and we need a full accounting, and someone needs to be accountable for that money. And it's a shame, and you are right. Today, the Canadian taxpayer is on the hook for that, and that needs to be resolved. Yeah. And so I'm in full agreement with those comments that you made. The government should have stayed out of the oil business, and it should have left it up to private enterprise. Chief McGuinness, I'd like to ask you some questions, if I may. Thank you so much for coming. Before I start, one quick question. You said we call you Indigenous. What would you like to be called?
That's not for me to decide, but me as a surviving descendant member of Tsuut'ina, we've always in English we always refer ourselves to the real human beings,
That's not the question, but you just made that comment. And I wanted some clarity there. I didn't want to misrepresent you. Our first two presenters at our committee meeting today, Mr. Spruill from the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers and Mr. McKenzie from Cenovus, both indicated the significant contributions that Indigenous peoples have made to the construction of this project, but also the significant benefits that they're going to experience and realize. Could you expand a little bit? First of all, do you agree with that? And could you expand a little bit on that, please?
Well, just to touch on that, myself, I'm not going to be, I'm here to give a testimony in regards to the Trans Mountain Pipeline and our work on the Trans Mountain Pipeline. And both of those individuals have big jobs, just like all of you sitting here, and just try to make sense, make everything work and go forward. And our job was to try to engage on the TMX, engage the First Nations. And we did that with our own monies. Like we literally spent millions, with allies that we have from industry. And it was from the starting point was through our ceremonies. And, talking to George now, my brother there, there's no disrespect. But our people in the prairies have been living amongst oil and gas, and we've never really had our fingers on it, our fingerprint, our footprint on oil and gas, the development of it. But our people have stories and legends of it too as well, teachings that are still alive and well in our homes today. And there's things that we can do to formulate. And again, this is what Natural Law, Red Nation does. We blaze trails. And we can blaze trails on healing. All of us are human beings. We come from Mother Earth. We get a cut, we heal. Same with the planets that we live on. Same with the sun. She heals. Mother Earth will heal. So, with that, I can say, as far as the economics go, no, we've never asked or engaged industry to fulfill our pockets to do engagement, and but we're at the table and we're willing to hear what kind of path we can develop so that all the issues that are happening on the coast. And again, I speak different points here, and Tsleil-Waututh is a powerful nation. I seen their area; it's pristine. Just go out there and see their area. But you come to my area too. My area is the prairies, and you look out to the Rockies. You can see in Treaty 7, in the prairies, you can see for miles. They say long ago that only the brave lived out in the open. So, with that, I thank you.
Thank you.